Roughly last year, I started Xenoblade Chronicles 3, a long-standing flagship IP of Nintendo's, and a personal favorite JRPG series I've been following for years. I was forced to take a break back then, and only recently managed to finish my playthrough. Overall, I was a bit let down by the gameplay and consistent holes that kept surfacing during my play. However, I still recommend it because even with all my complaints, I had a positive experience once all was said and done. Heads up, I'll be touching on major spoilers throughout the video, as I'll be recapping, justifying, and making all my thoughts and Xenoblade 3's known, so click away if you feel the need. I won't judge. It honestly took me more tries than I'd like to draft this up, and by the end of it I realized most of my complaints were worthless. An odd phenomenon I've experienced several times before is when I reach the end of a game and have no idea why feelings are bubbling up. I can quickly point out the flaws of games like Harvestella and The Last Story, and even more so I can outline why Xenoblade 3 didn't work for me on paper, but that's not the whole story of any of those titles. I can easily say that games like Xenoblade 3 don't work for me because there's an increase in system bloat. Without majorly changing interactivity between itself and previous entries, I can say how it's superfluous compared to Xenoblade Chronicles X, but fumbles in comparison with its depth. But again, all that's productive because my feelings trump whatever cognitive complaints my brain can muster up. Not one of my complaints or weird ick feelings stopped my play. Not one absolved the thoughts seeded by Xenoblade 3. It's a particular process to reach the end of a game and feel the need to justify one's feelings. Why do I feel this way? I think it's so terrible. So I deep dived into my thoughts and splunked for the truth. For context, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is the series' fourth entry, boasting a large open world, MMO-like combat, and stories built upon characters and the concepts of humanity and purpose. They're pretty profound experiences, and expectations suggest 3 should do the same. Part of why I pressed on was because of pedigree and legacy. I've always loved this series and its games. So when I felt the suspension of disbelief tighten, strain, and snap, I trusted it wasn't the end of the world. There are plenty of incongruous elements in the plot. Significant devices like the Sword of Eternity and Riku's history or backstory kinda go unexplained. The premise behind summonable weapons and the virtual vibe of the world are mostly left up to interpretation. Honestly, a lot is left unexplained or justified because the god of that world wanted it that specific way, leaving the finer details overlooked. And none of that ruined my adventure, but it defo hurt the experience. However, despite my nitpicks with the world and plot, the game's message was successfully delivered. It's typical in low-concept media, the shit that's complicated, convoluted, and generally hard to pitch or explain, that characters are the bulk of the premise and can successfully sell the story regardless of other elements, and I'd say XC3's cast succeeds. The cast naivete is the perfect lens into the world. Furthermore, their innocent natural growth as their horizons broaden help enlighten overlooked universal human concepts with young adult characters because of their unique background. Past them, the story also relies on the visual depiction of the supposed paths outlining choices to hammer home its core concept that one's destiny is directly tied to their decisions. So despite the world and narrative having some holes in their patchwork dressings, I still think the message gets delivered because the characters are so wonderfully done. The events depicting the characters' themes and development sell the game. Notably, the 3 main concepts Xenoblade 3 expressed to me were the romanticization of reality, its call to arms, and the death of literary academia. There are a lot of other vital themes beneath the surface as well, but they're accent flavors to the Neapolitan cake that is Xenoblade Chronicles 3 for me. For example, the parody was established behind greedy old geezers manipulating the world's wars to fund their immortal lives and entertainment. Plenty is present in terms of theming. It's a layered work, but I'm only here to highlight what's most important to me. Starting with the call to arms, or CTA, for any Albion fans. Every Xenoblade game is known to subtly suggest the player, its audience, to prioritize the people around them. It casually tells you to get up and call your loved ones, reach out, reconnect, and value the time left between you and your mutuals. It does this by consistently prioritizing human interaction and their importance in itself. Xenoblade is unique in the fact that it wants the audience to put it down and go outside and touch grass. XC3 IMO is the most direct with this message. Hence the parity of control between the in-game villains and IRL ones. There's a call to action, specifically to youths, like the party, to be the change they want to see in the world. It tackles how change isn't going to happen autonomously. We can't wait for things to get better. We have to make it happen ourselves. It does this by highlighting the eternal state of things and how only those aware of their impact can decide to change the world. It calls out our capability with our freedom of choice and asks us to apply it, because in Xenoblade Chronicles 3, they don't have that awareness that the world is fucked. This is partly why I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 romanticizes reality. Our world is preferable to the game's world. Its inhabitants are born into war with limited lifespans and ignorance abounding. The soldier has no choice, and they serve the very people who value them the least. It's a fucked life they live in the endless now. The mundanity of reality is romanticized in place of the fictional world. Compared to previous Xenoblades, it's honestly a bit off. In the first and second main entries, the worlds are decaying and dying, but retain their beauty and deserve preservation. It's about fixing and living with what we got, while 3 is more concerned with a full reset, the death of itself, and an attempt to return to a proper and new world. That's why I didn't fuck with it at times, because it's honestly one of the most negative Xenoblade games. It demonizes the world they inhabit in preference for romanticizing reality, which, alongside the call to arms, defo calls out my escapism directly and begs me to do something different. But I need my escapism, and I need pretty lovely fantasy worlds to facilitate it. It may also explain the darker tone and visuals and plot, because while vivid and colorful, it gives me mad Xenoblade Wii vibes with its more muted color tones. I'll also note how this is the Xenoblade game that dives deeper into despair than any other. One scene that sticks out is the final bout within, which proves that even the most despicable is relatable. Noah admits he could easily have gone down the same path and become just as villainous, just as N could have done differently. It gives a hella positive message because N is redeemed when he forgives himself and takes the first step down the other road. It's mad ambitious to redeem your antagonist while suggesting he's sympathetic by saying the protagonist could have easily have become him. Plus, they make it all believable as hell with some proper prior character development and context. I mean, the reason I think XC3 is the darkest and most depressing game is because of the Noah and Mio prison scene and, that entire montage that just drags you into despair. I honestly held out hope, but the cutscene just kept going and going until finally it stole my hope and eventually very well proved just how anyone could become N if pushed far enough. Not that I think what he did was right, but that I get it, and I understand now how important hope is for not just people, but humanity. And moving on, despite all my nitpicks and the patchwork writing on display, I still enjoyed Xenoblade Chronicles 3, because it was impactful, regardless of its flaws. It took me hella too long to realize how little the details matter so long as the vision is realized. I mean, fuck, I didn't even like the combat that much, and Xenoblade 3 still managed to leave a firm-ass good impression. Because normally I get a kick out of detailed world-building, tight combat, and magic systems, and romantic fantasy settings. But even still, I can settle for a wasteful world and plot that destroy themselves to deliver a powerful as fuck message. And the root of low concept is the characters and delivery of the story, so even if not everything makes sense or that some puzzle pieces are still missing, I can still have fun so long as the big picture is intact. It's kind of one of the more significant gamer pitfalls to overanalyze the lore to the point of personal frustration and purposeful reduction of the sum of an experience. And like, that doesn't mean I didn't struggle with it at times. XE3 was mad frustrating for me, with its suspension of disbelief, weird plot hole shit. Like with the antagonist manifestations of regret becoming the protagonist, which by the by is rad as hell, but also very open-ended as to how the fuck did that happen. Plus the combat felt bloated with needless puddle-deep menu crap that ultimately felt worse than Xenoblade Chronicles 2, despite promising some complexity akin to Xenoblade Chronicles X and failing. But again, all those complaints are my own and ultimately don't compromise the message. That all being said, my complaints are nothing more than my complaints. And the final verdict and interpretation was infinitely more valuable than all of that. I mean, the game's pretty as fuck. The OST is a banger like always. I love flutes now, I guess, and I'm excited for its DLC. Hell, all of the Xenoblade DLC, as it's all that's left for me to experience in the Blade series. I recommend it all 10 out of 10 if you can spare the time, patience, and eventual out loud okays, whatever, and I guess when shit just doesn't make sense. So yeah, I liked it. It delivered more than its message. I got a class on the importance of not mincing the little details and simply opting to enjoy the bigger picture. The bigger picture was also worth the oversights. I feel more games could attempt functional escapism and poignant calls to action outside the game world simultaneously, because it's kind of bold as hell and I really dig it. So if you got through the whole video and still feel like there's more to learn because yeah, I skipped a lot of details, it's really good, and if you can afford the AAA price, pick it up. And if you're a fan, please help me understand why you loved it, because it took me a lot of effort to understand why I loved it. 10,000 words reduced to 2,000, and I'm mad curious why other people enjoy something that's so honestly weird in a good way. And if you can't afford the AAA price, Xenoblade 1 on Wii, on something called Dolphin, might be worth a look-see into. So, yeah, that's all I can offer on Xenoblade 3. I didn't really want to do an hour-long video about pretty negative things when overall my experience was positive, so positive games deserve positive videos. And the next one's going to be kind of similar, and it's ironic and disproportionate game length to video length. Look forward to a shorter game, longer video. So, yeah. Hope you enjoyed, and take care, y'all. Good to be back.